Now, do you remember back in 2019 when school students around the world were skipping school once a week to participate in Fridays for Future demonstrations? What do they want? Well, action from political leaders and businesses to stop global warming and speed up the transition to a carbon-neutral economy. A lot has happened since then, of course. The European Union has decided that its economy should become a carbon-neutral area by 2050 and aims for a 55% reduction in net greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And here at the ECB, we concluded that the physical impact of climate change and the risks associated with the green transition have a profound impact on our mandate, which is price stability and our work keeping banks safe and sound. And to keep track of our progress, but also of scientific developments, we established the Climate Change Centre at the ECB in 2021. So where do we stand today? What is science telling us about the economic impact of climate change? And what have we done at the ECB to limit our exposure to climate and nature-related risks? You're listening to the ECB podcast, bringing you insights into the world of economics and central banking. My name is Paul Gordon, and to answer these questions, I'm joined today, I'm honoured to say, by Professor Johan Rockström, who is the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, and Irene Heemskerk, who leads the ECB's Climate Change Centre. Both of you, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul.
So let's start with you, Johan. You've studied climate trends over decades. Climate warnings, of course, go back a very long time. Where do we stand in the fight against climate change today, especially given there are some extremely big challenges out there fighting for public attention, the war in Ukraine, and so on?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. No, so unfortunately, the verdict is darker than ever before. Since 2019, where you started, we've added another 200 billion tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. The remaining carbon budget to be able to still hold global mean surface temperature rise as close as possible to 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming is down to almost, equivalent to 3 years of emissions at current rate. So it's basically consumed. And the latest science shows that we'll be breaching the boundary of 1.5 degrees Celsius within the next 5 to 10 years. So we are soon in what we call overshoot mode. And overshoot mode will, we know, with very high certainty, mean hundreds of billions of US dollars in economic costs around the world because of rising human amplified extreme events of fires, droughts, heat waves, particularly labor productivity decline because of life-threatening heat. But we also know that this means that we're approaching tipping points because the most science shows today that, even the Greenland ice sheet, but also the Amazon rainforest and the West Antarctic ice sheet, and definitely the tropical coral reef systems, livelihoods of 400 million people, are likely to cross the thresholds already when we are permanently above 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we are at a high-risk moment, and this is something that needs to be taken very, very seriously now that we can say also, as a closing remark on this intro statement, that even though the diagnostic is dire, we also see that the planet is actually remarkably able to still dampen the impacts of the stress we're causing on the system. So, the conclusion is that the window is still open to turn this around. We can still solve it. We can still have a safe landing. But the window is closing very rapidly.
And there are areas where we've dealt with, not solved, but at least attacked some of the challenges, which we'll come to in a moment. But you mentioned the overshoot, which is an interesting one. I looked at some of your charts, which, if I understand correctly, suggests that even if we do take action, these overshoots take potentially decades to come back to some form of equilibrium.
The planet is a large engine. It's a large biophysical engine with a lot of inertia. And the beauty of it is that it has this ability to dampen and slow down change, but it also means that it harbors a lot of change. Even if we turn things off now, we will have decades of continued warming. So overshoot at best, the best science can offer today is, we believe today from the best science, 40, 50 years of 1.6, 1.7 degrees Celsius before potentially coming back. And the only way of coming back is to follow the European Union plan of phasing out fossil fuels by 2050, scaling carbon dioxide removal, transforming the agricultural system from the single largest source to sink, but also investing in nature, securing that the marine systems and intact nature on land continues being this phenomenal biophysical help by dampening. It's absorbing 50% of the carbon dioxide we emit today in intact nature on land and in the ocean. This is a stress response of the planet, but it's still a stress response of a healthy planet. And that is what we also need to recognize. That could take us back to 1.5. If we fail on any of these accounts, continue deforesting the Amazon, continue degrading land, continue to avoid investments in carbon dioxide removal, then it's very unlikely that we can bring us back after overshoot.
Yeah, I mean, Irene, part of the role of the Climate Change Center was to bring this into central banking. And as I said, there are challenges out there. The war in Ukraine was one. At the moment, US tariffs clearly have an impact on our mandate, price stability, and we do have to think in terms of our mandate. So how are you finding it for you? Do you share this assessment, and how does it impact your work?
Well, I think one of the things that Professor Rockström set out so clearly is the urgency, right? That basically we don't have a choice. And I also want to mention, there are, of course, other topics that require our attention at this speed. We're looking at terrorists, we're looking into geopolitical movements, everything. But that should not leave us, dim the spotlight on climate change. And I think the two also really go well together, right? If you think about security, if you think about the green transition, what renewable energy can bring us, in the end, it can bring us also energy independence, meaning security. If you're thinking about measures to take to build resilience, our economy more resilient, if you're thinking about making sure that our feet are dry, that we have the infrastructure that is resilient to it. So it's basically all these things, and also making sure that we're competitive against other economies in the world. Climate change is part of all of that. And because it's just intertwined with our whole economy. If we destabilize the planet, we will destabilize our economies as well. So everything we do, we have to take this into account. It's not a one-off issue and we deal with it or not. And we don't even have a choice, if I listen very carefully to Professor Rockström. So therefore, it's important that the ECB stays the course. And therefore, it's very, we already see that it's impacting food price inflation, that the losses are increasing on our economy, right? It's expected that in the next 5 years, extreme weather events could put 5% of euro area economic output at risk. These kind of numbers we're talking about. This could put risk to banks. So that's why within our mandate, we have the obligation, how I would say it, to look what is the impact of climate change and what is impact of nature degradation, analyze that and act accordingly to address it within the tools we have at hand.
Okay. So
just add a piece of science that we just discussed before coming in here, which is that one of the largest concerns that we have today scientifically is the risk of a shutdown of the AMOC, which is the overturning of heat in the North Atlantic, one of the engines that runs the whole conveyor belt of heat in the global ocean.
This is where the heat is supposed to flow from the south to the north and back.
Exactly.
Again, right?
It is saline, warm water flowing from the Southern Ocean all the way up via the Gulf Stream, comes to the southern tip of Greenland, releases heat to the atmosphere, making it possible to live where I come from in the Nordic region. This heavy saline water then sinks, and that is the thermodynamic engine, which then flows back on the bottom of the ocean to the Southern Ocean, and this is what circulates and keeps the whole system in balance and supplies, not least, nutrients to large parts of fish populations in the ocean. When the green ice sheet now is melting so fast, it dilutes this system by flushing out fresh water. The water gets less dense, less heavy, and it sinks much slower, and the AMOC slows down, and the risk is that it shuts down. Now, the uncertainty range is very high, but the impacts are catastrophic, because we know that it would accelerate warming in the world, it would change the monsoon systems, and it would have an abrupt cooling in the northern parts of the hemisphere. So it's a catastrophic, unacceptable impact, while the likelihood of it occurring has a high degree of uncertainty. But the latest science shows that uncertainty may be now approaching a level of 10% likelihood of occurrence within the next 70 years. 10%. Now, 10% for a catastrophic impact is unacceptable risk, because risk is equal to probability times impact. So this means that we have reached, with the AMOC, a risk level that requires immediate action. Even if the uncertainty ranges are high on the likelihood, because the impacts are unacceptably high, we need to avoid it. It's like a don't look up moment. It's like an asteroid on its way on planet Earth. Even though we cannot be absolutely certain, it's an unacceptable impact. So that's why we need to act. And I think that is something we'd love to see more of in the dialogues, also in the kind of economic discussions.
Okay. Now, the data matters a lot here, even with the uncertainty around it. Planetary boundaries is what you're known for, what I mentioned at the start of the program. Explain what that is.
Yeah, so the planetary boundaries is research now that soon has 20 years of advancements. It starts with two questions that arise from all the evidence of something called the Great Acceleration, where we have all the hockey sticks of rising human pressures on planet Earth. Second, that tipping points are hardwired into the Earth system.
Just to clarify, the hockey stick is the chart that shows things moving along at a relatively slow pace and then accelerating.
Exactly.
The shape of a hockey stick.
The Great Acceleration, the hockey sticks, is that time-wise, you can basically pick any parameter that matters for human well-being in the environment, from carbon dioxide to biodiversity loss. Up until the mid-1950s, we had problems, but it was kind of linear increase of pressures. And then we have this takeoff point, an exponential rise from the 1950s onwards, and that's what's defined as the Great Acceleration. And that is one key entry point why we need planetary boundaries, that we can today say with no hesitation that over the past 30, 40 years, we're putting pressures at the planetary scale. There's no more atmosphere or ocean or ecosystems in abundance that can be exploited unsustainably without having invoices being sent back from the Earth system itself. If you have that insight, and if you understand that the Earth system is this self-regulating system with tipping points, and now that we know that the Holocene, the last 10,000 years, is an extraordinarily stable state of the planet that has enabled civilizations to develop as we know them. Our world has depended and has evolved during that period. Bundle that together, and two questions arise. Question one is, what are the Earth system processes that regulates the health and stability of the planet? And the second question is, can we, for each one of these processes, identify control variables where we can quantify a safe boundary beyond which we are at risk of crossing tipping points, but within which we are having a high chance of keeping the planet in a stable, livable state for human development, meaning as close as possible to the Holocene. That is the planetary boundary framework. And it's been going through 3 iterations of updates. We've now started a very ambitious plan of updating the science every year because we feel that we're moving so fast in the wrong direction. The latest assessment, which was released at the New York Climate Week just 2 weeks ago in September, assesses that 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries are now breached. So it's not only climate, it's also biodiversity loss, it's land system change, so our deforestation of both temperate, boreal, and tropical forests. It is overloading of nitrogen and phosphorus, reactive nitrogen and phosphorus, causing eutrophication and dead zones in marine systems. It's overconsumption of fresh water. It's overloading of chemicals. And finally, the 7th one that crossed the safe level we assessed just last year is ocean acidification. So 7 out of 9, 2 of them are still in the safe space. It's the stratospheric ozone layer and it's aerosol loading. Actually, 2 planetary boundaries where we are having success stories. The Montreal Protocol gave us a turning back towards existential risks because of, depleting the stratospheric ozone layer that protects us against dangerous UV radiation. That was a world that listened to science and acted innovatively in industry. Very interesting case of planetary stewardship. And then the aerosol loading is that we are cleaning up our cities. We're seeing really positive developments on getting rid of smog and health threats in the air, which then brings us back towards the safe space there. So that is a tool as a monitoring system to guide human development, to guide the economy in the Anthropocene, in this phase where we, Greek for humans, anthros, are the dominating force of change on planet Earth.
Yeah, I think it's quite important. I just want to reiterate this point because so many people say, well, the planet's been cooler in the past or warmer in the past and humans have survived. This stable period, the Holocene, goes back. It covers pretty much all of modern human development, right? I mean,
entirely.
Yeah.
So, the story is quite well understood today. I mean, 18,000 years ago, we are in deep ice age. We're a few million people on planet Earth. We're hunters and gatherers. We live in caves. We have a rough time. Environmental conditions are incredibly variable. We leave the last ice age and we enter this stable interglacial Holocene period. We barely enter it and we go through the Neolithic Revolution. We domesticate animals and plants, we become farmers, we settle down, and we start the journey towards community development, which then becomes cities and the globalized economy as we know it. During this whole period of 12,000 years of stability, we have a planet, can you imagine, that operates at 14 degrees Celsius of mean temperature, plus minus 0.5. So everything that skeptics love to say, that we have the medieval warm period when the Vikings could sail over the Atlantic and find grapes on Greenland, or the little ice age in Europe, sure, these variations occurred. You have a savanna state of the Sahara Desert, and then it flips over in the mid-Holocene towards its arid state of a desert today. This all happened, natural variabilities within that corridor. Now we are exiting that corridor. We've reached 1.3 degrees Celsius of warming. We're already outside of the corridor. So we should not be surprised that things smash back quite hard. If you prolong that corridor further back, the latest science shows that 3 million years, we've never exceeded 2 degrees. So there is this narrow corridor, which is when we've developed civilizations as we know it. But how long time have we existed as modern humans on planet Earth? Well, we've been around, as far as we understand today, 250,000 years. So we've lived through 2 ice ages and 2 interglacials, 2 Holocene-like warm periods. The Eemian, 120,000 years ago, and the Holocene. Well, during that deep ice age, 2 ice ages, we were only hunters and gatherers. And we were still operating within this widened corridor, +2 warmest temperature and -5 deep ice age. And you can take that back all the way 3 million years through the entire Quaternary. That's a geological period when you can talk of a biophysical planet resembling the planet as we know it, with a continental configuration, hydrological cycle, oxygen, carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, anything beyond 3 million years, and you're kind of no longer able to talk of a planet resembling our planet. And during that entire period, as far as we understand today, we never exceeded 2 degrees Celsius of warming. So now we're following a path that will take us to 3.1 degrees Celsius of warming just within the next 70 years. I mean, 3 generations, less than 3 generations. That's, I can tell you without any hesitation, that's a path to disaster. It's an unacceptable path. There's no proof that we can support the world as we know it in a 3.1 degrees Celsius warming world. You have to rewind the climate clock 4 million years to find a planet that was at that state. You're outside of the Quaternary, you see? So that's what is so fantastic in a way with the science, that we understand this today. It gives us a measuring point. But of course, it gives you a little bit of goosebumps as well, of nervousness. But it just shows Irene's point that it's an urgency point here. We don't want to allow ourselves to continue letting the economy run towards this danger point. We're already in danger, but we don't want to go into unmanageable danger points.
Because you've said in the past that the political targets we hear about, 1.5, 2, you said these are not political negotiations, these are real limits.
Yes, I mean, I think that's one of the perhaps most important messages that we have to help each other to communicate to the world. 1.5 degrees Celsius is not a goal, it's not a target, it's a limit, it's a boundary. It's not that you crash when you pass it, but you enter high-risk terrain. And that is what people have to understand, that 1.5, if just want to have one carry-home message, is 1.5 is a big number. Take it seriously.
I mean, Irene, this is what you feast on, all of this data, but you've got to put it into a central bank context. So how does it help you?
A lot, right? Mm-hmm. Because I'm so happy that Professor Rockström is here, or Johan, if I say. But this is what we need to, I think economics and climate science has been, or natural science, have been developing much more in isolation. And really the awareness and really feeling it in every vein that our economy is dependent on what's happening to the planet. And we have to take that into account. So we're connected, and therefore to have the science talking to economists and also politicians, of course, but also economists, what does this really mean? So for the ECB, we've been setting really big steps since 2020, 2021. Like you mentioned, the Climate Change Center was created. We've really looked at all the tasks we have at hand. Okay, but what does this climate science tell us? And what does it mean for the mandate that we have at hand? So we've been looking very carefully, okay, what are banks doing to manage risk coming from climate change and nature degradation? We've been executing stress tests. Okay, will the economy look like in a hothouse world or in a world that's keeps this limit of 1.5 degrees? And how do we transition to that? And what is the impact on the economy? We hold a lot of assets on our balance sheets. We've looked into, okay, what are the risks from climate change on that? Financial risk, what can we do to manage that? And we have been decarbonizing our corporate bond holdings over the past years when we still did the purchases. We've been improving our climate data, so our climate statistical indicators we've developed. So really at everything we have at hand here, we've been progressing to make sure that also in our forecasting for inflation, do we take climate change into account? And this is squarely within our mandate and an obligation we have. And if I look back now from 2021 when we started, where we have gone, where we are now, I think we really made great progress. But we still need to improve further, right? I see, because climate change is not stopping, so and nature degradation is still developing. So really making sure that we take that into account and understand, okay, what does this in the end mean for energy prices? Because this will impact inflation, to make it really concrete. What does this mean for mortgages portfolios of banks in areas where there will be floods, there will be wildfires? How are the risks developing there? Or companies that are dependent on water? I think you pointed out water. We really see this as an important risk developing. It's about water scarcity, so just not enough water. It's about too much water because we see so many floods around the whole planet, leading to economic damage. And we also see that the level of insurance against those catastrophes is declining. And historically, it's only been 25%. So there are financial risks to that. So we've really been looking at it from a very holistic way. Okay, what does it mean? And we're working with the banks, we're working ourselves, and we have to keep working on it. So stay the course, because it's not fading away.
Yeah. I mean, the way you describe the pace of climate change at the moment suggests we should be phasing out fossil fuels immediately, overnight, right? But economically, that would be extremely disruptive. And it's not the kind of thing a central bank could recommend. It's not our decision, clearly, as politicians. But I mean, what is the sort of right pace to move at the moment?
No, clearly, this is probably what you could call the big challenge. I mean, science shows clearly that given the limitation of the global carbon budget, the pathways that can take us back after overshoot and still hold the 1.5 degrees Celsius landing zone would require that we reduce emissions, with at least 5% globally per year over the next 25 years to reach a net zero world economy by 2050, essentially following the guidelines. 5% global emission reductions per year, if you take all greenhouse gases, means something like removing 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalents from the global economy each year. So that would be the 2026 task, remove 3 billion, and we would be on track. Is that possible to do? There are models showing that, yes, there are scalable solutions that could take us to that point without destroying the economy. But you're absolutely right. It's a mammoth task. It requires global collaboration. It's not enough that you have certain islands of success. And if you start reaching 6, 7, 8% of emission reductions, which we will head to very soon if we continue to fail on bending the curve, then I would argue, even though there's, the evidence goes in a little bit different directions, but I would argue that then we are beyond what is feasible to do without having a global economic crisis. And one has to be very clear about this, and that's also a personal kind of note as well. I don't think what we need to do over the next few years is to immediately go from the current plus 1% per year of emission increase, which we're still doing, to suddenly shift over to 5% reductions, which is what science shows would be necessary. If we can just achieve going from +1 to -1, if we can just show that we are turning a corner, that we really are above the hump, we're now, the ball will start rolling downhill rather than continuously being on this uphill, dangerous path. I think that will give a lot of confidence to the global economy, because it's all about perceptions in the end. So I think you have to be also quite realistic here and pragmatic, of course, while at the same time having always the science as a reference point. The reference point says 5, but of course in the next 1-2 years, that is very likely not accomplishable, but you can at least bend the curve. And very likely that will accelerate and take us to perhaps even beyond 5% in 5 years' time. And then you can run the course that way.
We're talking about big initiatives here, but a lot of people or companies or institutions will say, well, there's no point in me doing something if everybody else isn't doing it as well. It's known as the tragedy of the commons in economics. In this case, the common is the entire planet. How do we address that?
So I think science tells us, and also our economic impact tells us, we have to stay the course. And that means that everybody needs to take action. And I just want to maybe one step back on the different scenarios that how are we keeping the pace and what is the impact on our economy? Markets don't like shocks. So an orderly transition is the best way. And this is also what we have looked into at the ECB. So we looked into the different scenarios, hothouse world. So we don't do anything. And then we compared it to a trajectory that we just do it orderly, or we take action too late. And this orderly scenario is really the best for our economy. This also means that we have jobs ready, right? People to install solar panels, people to have renovating heat pumps or anything like that. So all those skills, to make sure that we can orderly transition. It's not for free, right? Because it will require investments to make. But our work also shows that the investments we make now extra will outweigh the cost of unabated climate change. So really the expenses of physical risk and losses that we will face. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, right? So it will require investment. Governments can't take this alone. So we need private investments as well. So we need also clear transition paths. Where are we heading so we can unlock the investments to those plans to really make the transition happening. So really having this orderly transition. And then my last point on this is that, let's not forget, if we think about 10 years ago, I don't think anyone would have imagined that you would be able to drive your electric vehicle from Frankfurt to Milan without charging, right? So we're over 700 the range of electric cars. Nobody thought that we would have, for the first time in history, I think, first 6 months of this year, electricity use of renewables outweigh the electricity use of coal or any fossil fuels. So it is happening here. So I think we have to leverage all those examples. And maybe one really close to everyone, if you would order a coffee now anywhere almost, you would get options not only for dairy milk, but also other milk. So all these small things, I just want to emphasize that it is happening. And if we start thinking now, if this orderly transition, okay, but where do we want it to bring us next and get us with this 5% reduction, and in every decision we make, personally, financially, economically, or any decision that we make, that we take into account, okay, but how can we live within those planetary boundaries and make it sure that we have this stabilized, because it stabilizes our lives and it stabilizes our economies.
And I think that this is where you want to have top down and bottom up, so to say, to act simultaneously and meet each other. Because I'm totally with Irene here. I mean, that's one, I think, the greatest joker card we have to play. I mean, it's one card we can today play with very high degree of scientific rigor is the risk card. But we can also play the opportunity card, because we have so much evidence of scalable solutions that are competitive economically, that give better outcomes for security, for health, for stability, for jobs, for the economy. But it will still not add up if you just have islands of success around the world. You need some big decisions. Stubbornly, you have to continue trying to get some big decisions. And one of them, of course, is to stop all investments in fossil fuel infrastructure. You simply have to, we cannot continue building coal-fired plants and continue to have new exploitation of oil and gas. That has to terminate, and has to terminate fast, and has to be a global dialogue on that. And the second decision is, of course, we have to remove the subsidies to fossil fuels. I mean, the $4 trillion per year in direct subsidies, that's simply something that has to be, it's difficult, but it has to be debated, I would argue, at the World Trade Organization, the UN. It has to continuously be at the center stage. And then I don't know how you feel, Irene, but I mean, I would bring back the question of a global price on carbon. I would stubbornly continue trying to argue that, we have a correction to make here. The market economy is failing because it is subsidizing all economic development by allowing itself to pollute the climate or destroy the climate. Factoring that in will make immediately an additional correction to a market failure. And these are kind of three decisions that would help us so much in all these islands of success. I mean, you could actually turn around and say, isn't it extraordinary that all this electrification, all the solar panels, all these green technologies are now able to compete with fossil fuel incumbents, despite the fact that the fossil fuel incumbents are subsidized by the planet? I mean, even if they're not subsidized by the economy, they're subsidized tremendously by the planet. So it's unfair competition, and still they're about to succeed. And I think that is a correction that would accelerate things even further.
Okay. It's almost time to wrap up. We normally finish on what we call a hot tip, so a bit of advice for our listeners. Have you got any suggestions you would like to give to our listeners? Irene, first? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think anyone who listens who hasn't done so already, please watch the podcast or the YouTubes of Johan on planetary boundaries, because
Very
I think this really,
right?
it's really like it really inspired me, and I think it provides us more insight on the situation we're in, but also some hope what we can there's still hope that we can turn this. Secondly, think of something you will do differently tomorrow or in the coming month. And you don't have to start big and throw your life around right away, but think of something, okay, what is really my impact on the environment, and how can I limit that? And think of that in your personal life, when you vote, when anything you do.
Yeah, perhaps two things briefly. I mean, one is that just a few days back when we released the Eat Lancet Commission report on healthy diets from sustainable and just food systems, running for the first time a full model into comparison on the future of food, showing that even if we phase out fossil fuels, even if we would do everything right on the energy transition, we would still fail on 1.5 degrees Celsius if we do not transform the global food system. And that healthy diets, which has a significantly lower share of animal protein and more plant-based components of the diet, is probably one of the fastest and most impactful contributions also to a healthy planet. So there is a win-win here on healthy diets and healthy planet. But the second is an information that I learned just a few days back, and even I was ignorant about this, which is that Ethiopia has just decided to prohibit imports of internal combustion engine cars, which means that they've gone all in on electrification. And as you know, in Norway, 90% of all cars that are sold are electric. In Denmark, it's approaching 50%. We see these S-curves of exponential change, which just shows that we're in the beginning of the end of mobility being driven by diesel and petrol. And I think that is something that the world is not really seeing it. It goes so fast right now that we're not even communicating the full picture. And I think that's the kind of insight that is also really important to have.
Okay, well, look, I thank you very much indeed, both of you, head of the Climate Change Centre, Irene Heemskerk, and the Potsdam Institute, Professor Johan Rockström. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I look forward to more of your work. You've been listening to the ECB podcast with Paul Gordon. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe, leave us a review. And in the spirit of Europe, as always, I'd like to channel Sweden this time, your homeland, Professor Rockström, where I had an excellent and very cool summer vacation this year, and say, hey da. Until next time, thanks for listening.
Thank you.